When I'll announce your name, you can switch on your video.
Oh, okay. I'll do that. Thanks.
Thank you. The event will begin shortly. We are waiting for all our guests to join the event. Thank you for your patience. Hello everyone, my name is Nausheen Zanab and I welcome you all to KiwiTech's 808 workshop for startups and entrepreneurs to help them navigate the challenges of starting a business, making it sustainable and taking it to the next level. Today, we have a mentor session on mastering capital raising for entrepreneurial success by Jason Shapiro, CEO and founder 82i. Now, let's get started with a brief introduction to KiwiTech followed by the workshop. It's my pleasure to introduce KiwiTech, a one-of-a-kind innovation ecosystem that's home to 600 plus portfolio startups and 300 plus mentors, all committed to supporting innovators globally. It all began in 2009 when a team of seasoned entrepreneurs who had previously built and scaled a publishing services company for a 9-digit exit to start another company to empower startups with innovation. All in all, we at KiwiTech particularly team up with early to late stage startups to support entrepreneurs with 360-degree support in terms of technology, fundraising, mentorship, networking opportunities, and go-to-market strategy. Without further ado, I would now like to invite Jason, CEO and founder at 82i. The screen is all yours, Jason.
Thank you, Nausheen. I'm really looking forward to the conversation, and I appreciate you guys hosting me today. Let me go ahead and share my screen, and I will make this a full screen mode. So yeah, once again, thank you. We at 82i are equally committed to founders and innovation, and are excited to collaborate with you guys here, and excited to have this conversation. Today what we're going to talk about is comparing capital raising to dating, is sort of the analogy that we like to use. We think it's pretty apt, and we think it crystallizes and forms some connections for founders, regardless of where they are in their capital raise process and in their capital raise experience. So for today, what we want you to leave with is a more informed, optimistic view about raising capital. It can be really scary and it can be tough when you are also running a business and a startup nonetheless to need to raise capital. But we think there is a method that works and a method that minimizes stress and pain. And we'll talk about that. We hope that you have more comfort with the game of raising capital. It is sort of a game, and there are cheat codes in a way. And we'll help you think through that. And then lastly, help you understand how to best prepare for the raise. Preparation, as with many things, is key in raising capital, and we'll chat about that. So first, we'll talk about the good and bad news about raising capital. I'll give a quick introduction to myself so you know who is presenting. There are three components, we believe, to successfully raising capital: the necessary thing, the single most important thing, and the boxes, and we'll talk through what those are. And then lastly, we'll have the top mistakes and misconceptions that we see founders make when they raise capital. And one thing I'll say from the beginning that I want to make people aware of is that I am very, very open to people asking questions. If you want to throw Q&A in the chat. I started my career as a teacher and am used to being bombarded with questions throughout a presentation. So very happy to answer them along the way and want this to be a conversation as much as we can. So bad and good news about raising capital. So bad news. I mentioned this earlier, but founding a startup is a tough job. Everyone, on this call knows that very well. And raising capital is just another thing on your plate. There are all of these other little blobs that you got to think about: building a product, hiring employees, staying mentally fit, managing cash flow, you name it. It's one of the balls that you are juggling. And raising capital is another ball. It's an important ball, but it is just one of the additional things that you got to do on a day-to-day basis. So at this point in the presentation, we like to introduce who we call Founder Fred. And one point that I like to make at this stage in the talk is that we just did Founder Fred because we had this image handy, and Founder Fred sounded good with the two F's, but we just as much support Founder Francine in any gender that could exist and does exist. And so that's just the way we've done the presentation. But wanted to say that we are very supportive of all types of founders and so forth. And so Founder Fred is raising capital, and he's finding it to be challenging. So as we first mentioned, he has a business to run. That is a time-consuming thing on its own. When you raise capital, you are really doubling your job. You kind of have another full-time job. That's tricky. Secondly, it is and can be very hard to get feedback from investors. They are not in a position where they want necessarily to give you good feedback. Okay, so I got some feedback here that the magnification is very small. I don't know that I know how to do that. I've shared it on the full screen. Is everybody facing that challenge? Is this small for everybody? Let me see if I exit out. Is this any better?
Yes, this is
Okay,
better.
great. Thank you for sharing that. I'm glad that works. So it's hard to get the feedback you need because investors don't really want to tell you the truth because it puts them in a bad spot. And so you can be sort of spending a lot of time lost in a way and just not getting what you need to get better. The process is overwhelming. There's all kinds of components to it. You don't know what you don't know. You may be a founder who's never raised capital before, and that's perfectly okay. This is not a skill that you're taught in school, and it's not something that you should know before doing it. On top of that, you're playing in an uneven game. Investors do deals and talk to entrepreneurs all day, every day. And just, to put it simply, they are better at deal making than most founders. And so it's an uneven playing field. And that's something that's sort of up against you. And lastly, as we put in the bottom, you don't have to be success. You may know your market super well. You may know your product super well. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you know the investor world super well. And so, at the bottom, you don't have to be great at raising capital to successfully raise capital. So, this just sort of lays out, where we know and think that, many of you are starting from. And so this is the good news. Raising capital, we firmly believe, is a game that you can learn to win. So you can win it while you conserve your time, while you grow your business, and while you keep your sanity. So that there is a way to do this, and that's what we're going to show you today. So, quick tangent, who I am. So, we have seen hundreds of founders pitch. That's like the sort of me in a nutshell at the top. I have been an investor prior to starting 82i, which I'll tell you about in a little bit, and I've probably sat in on over 2,000 pitches at this point. So I live in Annapolis, Maryland, with my wife and two girls. I grew up in Richmond, Virginia. I started my career as a teacher with the Teach for America program. And for those of you who aren't familiar, this is a program where after you graduate college, you spend 2 years in a low-income school and teach. And so I was a high school math teacher and a basketball coach, and had a wonderful experience with that and loved teaching. And so I did that, and then I went on and spent about 10 years in finance and venture capital, listening to thousands of pitches. And then a few years ago, I started 82i and really brought those two together. So this is a position for me where I can educate founders and I can do finance and business, which are the two things that I love, and why I think that I think we're in a really good position to help founders raise capital. So 82i, I founded as a growth services firm tailored to the unique needs of founders and entrepreneurial companies. Our mission is to make entrepreneurship easier. And we do that through an approach where we provide different services in different service lines. So this is capital raise we're talking about. We also provide CFO services. We have revenue growth. We have product operations. We call it a co-founder for hire model, where we work with folks on an hourly basis and make it super easy and flexible for founders to work with us. So to date, we have helped companies raise over $300 million. We've served 45 clients, and we focus on seed, Series A, all the way up to full sale or exit. Importantly, we are not an investment bank because we do not do a success fee. We do not believe in success fees, but we do basically the same thing. So that is me. Now, let's get into the meat of the conversation. So I mentioned earlier that there are three components of success raising capital. So first is the necessary thing. And what this is, and we'll talk more about this on page 12, you have to be what we call an investable business. The necessary thing is that the fundamentals of your business must be investable. If they're not investable, then, logically and obviously they, you're not going to find investment from investors. So you have to be investable. The second thing is what we call the single most important thing. Your expectations need to match the quality of your business. So your expectations for success at raising capital needs to match, and we'll get into what that means. And then lastly, the boxes that must be checked, you have to understand the rules of the game. You have to know the game that you're playing, or you might go in the wrong direction. You might make unforced errors, and nobody wants that. And so these are things like, how long it takes, how time intensive it is, what you have to prepare, who you should speak to, and so on and so forth. And so if you've got these three things, then anyone can raise capital. So let's double click a little bit more on what they are. So first is the necessary thing. So first thing is that you have to have an investable business. So first, let's start with how this goes wrong, because it helps paint the picture of how it goes right a little bit better. So how does this go wrong? You are uninvestable if you have unattractive historical financial metrics. A lot of founders will want to look at the projections in the future. Most investors want to focus on what's actually happened. And so you are, not investable if you have unattractive, historical financial metrics. That can be low growth, that can be low retention, that can be limited profitability. Secondly, you might be in a market that has challenging market dynamics. If your size isn't that big, if there's too much competitive intensity, that can sort of move you over the line of investable to not investable. An unconvincing strategy. It can be too complicated or it can be too futuristic with not enough actual progress. There can be, in certain cases, a lot of downside risk where an investor looks at it and says, yeah, maybe this is going to take off, but also like there's a pretty good chance I'm going to lose all my money. And so I don't want to, make that investment. And then lastly is market timing. The important part of this to point out is that some of these are red flag showstoppers, which on their own can make a business uninvestable. Others interplay with each other and sort of paint a picture of how attractive is a particular business for investment. So it depends on the market and the investor and so forth. As one just sort of simple example, if you're a SaaS business and you have 50% net dollar retention, then you're probably not in an investable space. That's just one silly example. There could be exceptions to it. But that's an example of the red flag piece. And then the other way to look at it where they interplay with each other is if you've got, below average growth, retention, profitability, below average market size, below average content or, below average competitive intensity and so forth, all of those things together could paint a picture where it's just not investable. So how does this go right on the investable side? Obviously, just the opposite of the left-hand side of the page. It can go right when you have the appropriate balance between the upside and the downside. So you may have shown really good growth historically, but you haven't been that profitable and it's a smaller market. That probably is enough to convince an investor. You may have a lot of growth with really good retention, but a super complicated strategy. That's probably enough to convince an investor. You have to have the right balance of where they are and that sort of thing. So the next box, what's irrelevant to whether this goes right, is a key and very, very common misconception of what does not matter for this question of investability. So one is how well you sell the pitch, the business during the pitch. I have met, of the thousands I've spoken to, 100, 200, 300 of folks think that they can sell their way into an investment round. And I don't blame them for it. Most founders are great salespeople. It's a lot of the reason that they got to where they are at that point. But it's tough to do that with an investor. And so selling, I don't think really moves the needle. I think what moves the needle is having really good metrics, a clean strategy, and a convincing argument. That investability sort of fundamentals of the business point. The number of investors you speak to also will not change the answer. The worst thing that I hear from founders that I hate to hear because I think it takes them further from their actual goal is the founder who says, I spoke to 550 investors, in Q1. That is an enormous amount of time. And I don't think that the 551st investor is going to have a different answer than the first 550. Better, what that person could do is take the 550 meetings times typically 30 minutes at least and spend that time building your business, improving your growth, your retention, your profitability, all these things, because that's going to make you more investable. And then when you're investable, you may only need 10 meetings to find your round. And so the number of investors you speak to will not change the answer. And then how well you execute on the capital raise checkboxes. Sometimes that cannot change the answer. That is a necessary component, but if you do it better or worse, it's not really going to move the needle. Lastly, on this page, the point I like to make is that our definition of investability is only true at a particular point in time. So it depends on what has happened historically, and that can change in a week, in a month, in 2 months. I've spoken to plenty of companies who, April 1st, they were not investable. May 1st, they were. And fundamentals of the business can change. You can prove things out, and that can completely alter the whole story. And so what's really important is to know if you are or are not investable. And if you're not investable, try to understand, well, what needs to happen for me to get there? And then invest all your energy into that. And then try again. So that's the first thing, the necessary thing. Now, we're going to go through a little bit longer example called the single most important thing. This is that your expectations for success in the round match the quality of your business. And this is where we're going to bring in this dating analogy. So it's a little bit cheeky, and so bear with me here, but we've all probably seen this in one way, shape, or form. So on the x-axis, we have uncompelling, and on the y-axis, we have level of assuredness. So on the left, you got uncompelling from a romantic success perspective. They're poor hygiene, they're boring, there's no ambition. Just to sort of take on some stereotypes of what tends to work on the dating scene and what doesn't in the movies. On the right, you have compelling. They're good looking, they have a fun personality, good job, yada yada. Every bachelor or bachelorette falls somewhere on that spectrum. On the y-axis, you have level of assuredness. So folks who are sort of cocky or really sure of themselves, they are aggressive, they can be talkative, they can be uncompromising, all the way down to sort of insecure. The other side of that is that they're passive, they're more of a people pleaser, they sort of ignore their own needs. And so the idea is that everyone kind of falls onto this chart. Now, and we call that person Bachelor Bob. Now we have Founder Fred. And so this is the same setup. You have on the x-axis, the investability quotient. And on the y-axis, you have that expectations point. So uninvestable, as we talked about earlier, would be poor retention, small market, competitive intensity, versus investable would be high retention, huge market, high growth. Those are all the things that are good for raising capital. Now on the y-axis, you have expectations. So another sort of group of founders that is a persona that you see out there is folks who are, pretty confident of themselves and potentially too confident. They can be aggressive, they can be talkative, they can be uncompromising. And then on the other end of the spectrum, another segment of folks that you see, especially on the capital raise trail, because people haven't done it before and they just don't have the confidence yet, is lower expectations for themselves. They're a little more passive. They're more of a people pleaser. They ignore their own needs, just like on the prior page. And so what I'm going to take you through now is sort of how this plays out in each of the different quadrants and what that means as a way to illustrate this broader concept of knowing your value. So call this in the top left the zone of nothingness. Nothing is going to happen. He is uncompelling, but he's super confident in himself, which is kind of an odd mix. So this is one we get out of the way pretty early because it's not that realistic. So we say he looks silly, he's cocky and unattractive, he'll be a bachelor for a while. In the same way, if founder Fred is uninvestable, but yet he's super confident in himself, and unfortunately this is a founder that you can come across, they just kind of look ridiculous. Like, not only is the business bad and will the investor quickly be able to tell that, but the founder thinks the business is good. And so that founder will spend a lot of time talking to investors and need to sort of reset their expectations. So that's the first quadrant. And so this is the sort of takeaway I wanted to point out. It's hard to be a good founder, and I mean this sort of across every dimension of being a successful business person in terms of managing your team, knowing a product, knowing your customer, raising capital. It's hard to do that without pulling feedback in from any direction that you can. And so for the founders that have an uninvestable business but are too confident, the sort of implication is that they're not using feedback and they're not internalizing it. And so very important for folks to do that and sort of stay away from that side of the grid. So next we have what we call the zone of danger. So this is where we're worried that someone might take advantage of him. So here, Bachelor Bob is super compelling, but he's insecure. In the dating scene, that can be a little bit confusing. You know, he's an attractive person, but he lacks confidence. Maybe there's something wrong with him. It doesn't quite add up. Something feels off. In the capital raise game, it's the same thing, zone of danger. This is something that investors love. They salivate over this. Basically, you have a great business that's highly investable, but the founder has low expectations. Why do investors salivate over that? Is that they can get great valuations. They can then, make the terms that they want and have a better level of probability for them to be successful. And so that is also a bad outcome for founders. If you have a great investable business, it is important for you to know that and make sure investors know that. Next, we have what I'd sort of jokingly call the line of proportionality. And so this is the line where the bachelor's level of compellingness is the same as their level of confidence. And so if you kind of look at George Clooney here, George Clooney is super compelling and also I'd imagine pretty confident. That's kind of okay in sort of this silly example because he's on that line of proportionality. However, if Jason Shapiro acted as confident as George Clooney was allowed to, then I, might look a little bit silly because I'm not as attractive as George Clooney. I'm not as compelling as George Clooney. And so to go over to founder Fred, we have the same line of proportionality. And as we define it, it's the sweet spot where the value meets the expectations. Now, if we think about what each of these zones are, if we think about this for Bachelor Bob, this is the situation where Bachelor Bob is more self-assured in himself than he is compelling. We kind of jokingly call that the clown zone. He might scare people. He's arrogant and he'll scare off the good ones, but he'll find one. The same thing happens with investors. And this happens and can happen quite often, actually. If a founder has super high expectations, but the investability of their business does not match it proportionally, it can really scare off some of the investors because it just kind of shows poor judgment. It shows that you don't really understand how valuable the company is, and it also implies that you might not be the best person to work with because you don't kind of see the world in the same way. And so, ultimately, this person may find investment. They probably will because they've got a compelling business. But they will lose out on some of the terms in the deal and the valuation and everything because, the investors will see this. Secondly, this is called the zone of satisfaction. This is okay, but we think in this case, Bachelor Bob or Founder Fred are selling themselves short. So here you've got Bob, he's super compelling, but he's not quite confident enough. He's a catch. Someone will find him and they'll hit out of the league for them, but he'll find someone, but it won't be ideal. In the same way with Founder Fred, this is in the same way for the zone of danger. This is what VCs want. They want someone who's really investable, but does not understand, their expectations. They don't understand what they're really worth, because in this zone, that is where investors will force better terms, force evaluation, that's lower. They'll win in the deal unless Founder Fred can understand his true value and move up into that line of proportionality. So the last zone here is no man's land. Bob is uncompelling and he's insecure. Pull it together, rethink your approach and rebuild your confidence, and then try again. Same thing with the capital raise. At this moment, and you should either double down and be patient, pivot, or move on. I would also say that it's okay to be in this zone, right? part of the founder journey is going through the ups and downs that come in the process. And so if you find yourself in that spot, it's important to ask those questions and decide where you want to take the business, but don't be too hard on yourself, because like I said earlier, where you fall on this can change, pretty quickly. So yeah, and so this is another point like I made earlier, like take the time that you're spending fundraising and put it out elsewhere, because that will have a better ROI. So this is the full grid for Bachelor Bob. Try and get as close to that as you can. This is the full grid for Founder Fred. Try and get as close to that as you can. And that's the single most important thing. Expectations match the quality of the business. So to do that, what do? You have to understand the objective quality of your business. And to do that, you need to have advisors, you need to talk to mentors, you need to talk to investors that you can trust, and you need to get enough opinions on the quality of the business that you begin to understand how people look at it, and you can think about it in an objective fashion. Advisors, mentors, that sort of thing. This is the right group to look at for this, to really understand what your expectations should be, to really understand how the investors look at the business, and that kind of thing. So third area is the boxes that must be checked. So there are a few different components of this. I will go through this a little bit faster so that we can open it up for Q&A at the end. And this is a little bit more like a textbook, because it is a little bit more, you do it or you don't, but we'll go through this nonetheless. So how long does it take to raise capital? On average, it can take about 5 months, but that can obviously shift depending on the situation. Phase 1 is organizing and prepping all of your materials. That sometimes can take longer than a month. It depends on the state of the documents in your business and what you've got. Then, you go reach out to investors and you track them just like you would your customers in a CRM. Then you have valuation discussions, you negotiate terms. Hopefully you have presented yourself in that line of proportionality so that you get the best terms. And then lastly, you'll go through the confirmatory diligence and close your round, and then get the dollars at the very end. There are different sort of timelines for different stages. In the earlier stages, sometimes this can be expedited, but this is a good conservative rule of thumb that we like to advise folks. So what do you need to prepare? Page 42 is all post MVP. Yeah, that's right. Prior to MVP, you're raising, pretty early dollars, and those can be more expedited. And it probably moves a little bit faster. That's a good question, Jace. So what do you need to prepare? Commonly requested information pre-LOI is kind of just any piece of data that exists on your business to date. Investors will want to see some standard data points up front, and then over time they'll want to see and have more and more as you go through the round. But what we usually sort of advise folks on, obviously financials, that they're going to want to see that. It can come out of QuickBooks, it can come out of wherever. If you have a financial model, that's usually very helpful, because it can teach the investors about the economics of your business and how you think about it. Lots of businesses kind of run off retention and renewals. And so in that line of work, a master customer file is really helpful. Employee and contractor census, so that folks can understand who is on your team, what they do, how you compensate them, and that kind of thing. Company overview presentation, otherwise known as a pitch deck, is helpful to sort of summarize all of that in one place. Cap table they need, and then board decks can be informative as well, because it can show how the company and the board have thought about the business over time. And then post LOI, after you sign, a lot of companies, depending on the stage, will hire advisors to double click on the tech, or double click on the accounting, or double click on the sales team, or whatever initiative they want to look at. And so in that world, they'll ask for all kinds of different data points and try and paint that picture. So I'm sure everybody knows what a pitch deck is. That's important. So one way that I see a lot of founders kind of get this wrong, especially the folks that are the ones doing the 500 calls, that kind of thing. They talk to everybody that emails them. Um, what's happened in the last sort of 5 to 10 years is that all of these funds have hired lots and lots of junior resources to email every entrepreneur in the world and say that they want to chat. And from their perspective, the more founders they talk to, the higher likelihood it is that they'll find sort of the diamond in the rough, the business that no one's seen, that has perfect financials, that's going, in a great direction and that sort of thing. From the founders they reach out to, their perspective, it's logical to sort of feel kind of flattered and want to talk to the investor. Hey, this person reached out to me. They want to know about my business. Let me chat with them. The thing though is that not all of those, even when they're reaching out to the companies, not all of them are really actually interested, and even worse, not all of them, in fact, most of them can't invest in the companies that they're speaking to. And so, fortunately for the founder, most funds and most businesses will put on their website what they do and what they invest in. And so, what we recommend is anytime you get an email from an investor, go look at their website, see if you match their investment criteria. This one that we took out has 3 to 20 million in revenue as their target. If you are a $1 million revenue business, there's really no point in talking to that investor at this stage, unless there's some other variable where you want to know them for 1 or 2 years down the line or whatever it is. And so it's important to spend your time wisely with that. If you have a situation where an investor has not identified on their website where they invest, then it's perfectly reasonable to ask them on the email. They email you, you respond and say, hey, nice to meet you. Can you tell me a little bit about your fund and where you invest? They'll tell you on the email, and then you can decide whether it's a good use of your time. If they're not matching what you do, it's not really a great use of your time or theirs to spend the time. And I think, as I mentioned before, you're going to be far better served if you invest that time in the business and grow in revenue and grow in your operation. So this is a page where we like to sort of show folks what it's like to look at a business from an investor point of view. So in a lot of these cases, they're going to have some sort of scorecard or report card that they're looking at, where they say, look at the numbers. Let's see, how we'd grade that. Is it an A, B, C, D, whatever? Let's look at the bookings, the metrics, the value prop. That's not necessarily a quantitative metric, but we can still grade it on a grading scale. Let's look at the customer concentration, the market timing. These are just some made up, topics. They're relatively common topics, but there could be any number of these. And so what they do is, they look at that and then they sort of step back and sit in their chair and say, well, is this an okay business? I really like the retention, but they haven't grown that much. The market timing isn't great. And they'll have a debate internally, and they'll try to come to an understanding on, whether they think this is a good time or not. And so this gets back to that investability point that we mentioned earlier. A lot of these things at any point in time are sort of out of your control. Like, you can't sort of wake up one day and change your revenue growth, overnight. That takes time. You can't wake up and change your bookings, value prop, and that sort of thing. But over time, you can. And so let's say, for example, this set of grades was not sufficient to be investable. Well, in a quarter, it could change. If we, did some really good work in revenue and got that up from a C to a B, and then market timing is not really within our control. But if you get some of those other metrics up, then you might sort of pass over that line and become, a more investable business. So the second way that we like to show folks how investors see the world is just to give them a sense of what are investors doing on a day-to-day basis. So investors, this is an example calendar. They are doing sort of 3 different roles. First, And most importantly to them, they are raising capital because those are their customers. Investors give the investors that you know are given investment from other investors so that they can find a return for them. And so, and yes, I'd be happy to share the deck after the meeting. And so, that's their first job. Their second job is to manage their portfolio of the folks that they've already invested in. And then the third job is to source and find new investments. And so, one thing that's easy to forget when you're on the fundraising trail is that you're only one component of their day to day, and actually, you're the least important to them. The sourcing thing and meeting new investments, it's fun. But if you ask any investor what is most important, first they're going to say their LPs, then they're going to say their portfolio, and then they're going to say you. And so you slot into an hour-long meeting or a 30-minute meeting that is around like their board meeting with their portfolio company, their investment team meeting, their diligence meetings, that kind of thing. This is another example of how folks will look at your business. They'll all have an investment committee deck where they summarize and display the information on the page in a way that they're used to seeing and used to comparing you to other businesses. So they'll want to look at sort of the high level, metrics and numbers and characteristics. They'll look at the product. They'll talk about the competitors and the market, and then they'll break down, some of the financial metrics like we talked about. So next is how to speak to an investor. As we talked about earlier, do not try to sell your way into a deal. This is it may seem right to founders because you guys are always on the road, and I've been in this seat as well. Like you're on the road, you're selling, you're pitching, and you're just a salesperson. But when it's not sort of backed up by the reality of the situation, it just comes off really badly because investors are very used to being sold to. Next is don't go too far into the details. It is and this is a very hard thing for some founders to do. I remember when I was an investor, one of the common points of advice and feedback that I gave to a lot of founders was to stay sort of high level and then let the investor go in the weeds when you want to and sort of focus on the story versus getting lost in the details. And that was a common piece of advice I gave. And then when I became a founder, I realized just how hard it is when you're in the depths of the day-to-day managing your business to zoom out and get to that 1,000-foot viewpoint. And so this takes practice. This can require getting some coaching or getting some mentorship or doing practice pitches or whatever. But the worst thing you want to do is sort of have the investors' eyes glaze over because you've shared and sort of overshared too many details to them. Because if they tune out, then it's hard to get their attention back. Third is do not reject the feedback out of hand. I think something that I had happen a handful of times. I was sort of always in this coaching and teaching mindset when I was an investor, and I wanted to sort of help some people out. And so I'd give feedback a decent amount of the time, and some percentage of that I would find folks that would not like the feedback and push back on it and sort of turn it into a bit of an argument. And I would recommend against doing that because when you hear the feedback from an investor, they may be wrong, and in fact, you are often more right more often than investors are, if I had to say. But from their perspective, they see the world, they'll see the world differently. And so it's important to lean in on that feedback, try and understand why they're seeing it the way they see it, and then try to pull as much of that feedback out, because you may not agree, but when you pull the information and you dig deeper, you may find something that helps you position better to another investor, or you learn something that's applicable down the line. So what to do? First, be clear about what you're looking for. So if you go out and you say, I'm looking for, I don't know, 1 million all the way up to like 10 or 15 million for a round, that's not a super great thing to say to investors, because the $1 million check investors won't really want to double click quite as much because they won't be sure if you're going the other way, and the other guys won't be sure if you're going that way. And so it's very helpful and important for you to focus in on what you want to what you want and what you need, and to be sort of specific about that. Second, do stand up for your needs. I have seen folks get into bad deals and convince themselves of bad deals because they don't feel, confident enough about their needs. These deals, in some way, in one way of looking at it, they kind of get etched in stone and they're really hard to like undo. And so you want to be really, really confident before you jump in with someone. And if you don't feel good about the deal, then don't do the deal. I had a business school professor that had this phrase that the goal of negotiating is not to get a deal done. The goal of negotiating is to get a good deal done. And that's something that people, can forget, especially in the context of capital raising, especially with investors that are trained and know how to get the most value out of the agreement and so forth. Third is stay level. It's an exhausting, frustrating process, and it can be very challenging. One of the worst, things you can do is sort of show a lack of emotional poise, because you're asking someone for what is often a large sum of money, and sort of the emotional volatility can cause a lack of trust and other things. And so stay level. If they give you hard feedback, take it gracefully, try to understand it, that kind of thing. So stay level. So then last, we've got the mistakes and misconceptions about raising capital. I'll go down the list and just sort of highlight any of the ones that I haven't otherwise talked about. We talked about selling your way into a deal. Misunderstanding your numbers. This is a mistake that is avoidable. Investors look at numbers and financial metrics for companies in a relatively similar set of ways. And it's not super uncommon for founders to be really good at product or really good at sales and not someone who spikes on finance. And so if finance and numbers and that sort of thing isn't your forte, then it's important to spend a little bit more time making sure you understand them, go through some practice, diligence sessions and that kind of thing. We talked about over and underestimating your value. We talked about the challenge zooming out. This is sort of the getting in the details thing. Talked about not listening to feedback. Underestimating odds of success is sort of aligned to the confidence, the y-axis. Misunderstanding the game. I would think about this more as like, are you talking to the right investors? Being underprepared to close the transaction. We talked about this indirectly, but this is just not having all of your documents together. One thing that can happen, and I've seen happen, is someone sort of, flippantly starts a capital raise process, and then the investor asks, okay, well, send me your data. And then they're like, oh, wait, well, I need a few weeks to put that together. That's not a great look. When you have a conversation with an investor, it's better to let that momentum carry quickly and have that data ready to go. That's a far better look. Talking about what you will do versus what you have done. I think this is one of those where there's, men are from Mars, women are from Venus kind of things. Like investors are from Mars, entrepreneurs are from Venus is the analogy that I'm trying to draw here. I think if you polled 10 investors, 70% of them, they're going to want to hear 70% of the time spoken about what's been done and 30% about the future. If you do the same thing with 10 entrepreneurs, you're going to hear people who want to talk 80% about the future and 20% about the past. And so it's important to know about those differences and, speak to your audience, and talk a little bit more about the past and a little bit less about the future. The investors still definitely want to know about the future. But because that's what most entrepreneurs want to talk about, when you talk to a bunch of different founders, you learn to like tune out a lot of what they say the future is going to be, because I think you naturally have to be optimistic in order to be a founder. And so, if investors are used to hearing founders say things that don't actually come to fruition because of reality and that kind of thing. We talked about talking to too many investors. We talked about talking to the wrong ones. We talked about not taking things personally or getting offended. And we talked about not being specific enough. And so, to conclude, it's not who you know, it is knowing yourself and knowing your business. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. And this is my contact information if you have any further questions.
Thank you, Jason. That was a great presentation. And for the audience, our mentor is ready for your questions. Please type them down in Q&A or chat. Till then, I would like to bring your attention back to the screen for our Startup Demo Day. Team, can we have the banner up for Startup Demo Day? That is happening on April 23rd, and we hope to see you there. All right.
Thank you, Derek. Thank you, Sue. Glad you liked it.
Jason, we have a question from Vic. It says, do you work with pre-revenue startups?
We do. Our model is all hourly based, and so usually with the pre-revenue startups, it can be a little cost prohibitive, but only for sort of the full service suite of offerings. I think with pre-revenue folks, a lot of times what we're doing is more coaching, more guidance, so that they can get the insight they need, but without spending too much money. It's kind of like, think of us as another lawyer, but a lawyer that's going to help you, get to a successful outcome.
All right. There is this question. It says, what are the 3 essential components that entrepreneurs need to focus on in order to successfully raise capital for their ventures?
Yeah, I think it would be the 3 that we sort of laid out here. I'll go back to this page, and sometimes it's helpful to look at it in hindsight because we've been through the deck, but it's really just this, are you investable? Do you have the right expectation? And have you checked all the boxes? If you do those 3 things, that's what's going to help you be successful. Awesome. Thank you, Terry, and thank you, Craig.
We have another question from Christy. It says, do investors read business plans? I have heard contradicting info.
It's a great question. I do not think so. I'm maybe in a rare case. And part of the reason gets back to what I was saying before, where investors want to know what has happened, not what will happen. They want to know about the past, not the future. And a business plan, sort of by its very nature, is very future focused. And so when I've seen business plans, when I was an investor, I would pop it open, I would look at the materials, and I'd think, oh man, this is like 10 to 20 pages of stuff I'd have to read. And that takes a lot of time. And so, better is a crisp presentation that's easy to flip through, easy to follow, and talks, as much about what has happened, if not more about what has happened than what will happen.
Thank you. We have another question. It says, what advice would you give to aspiring entrepreneurs who are just starting their journey in fundraising and seeking capital for their ventures?
Yeah, great question. The first one that I'd say is focus on understanding the other side of the table, specifically with a focus on understanding how investable your business is today. If you're early in the journey of fundraising, then potentially you're also early in the journey of your company. And one thing that folks can do wrong, like we talked about, is just spend too much time fundraising and too little time business building. Of the 2, business building is a far more important thing to be doing. And so that's sort of the first thing that comes to mind for me is focus on the business building. The second is start by having informational discovery sessions with people who know what it is to raise capital. Talk to folks who have been successful. Talk to investors that you may know that you can have an open, honest conversation with. Talk to mentors, advisors, that kind of thing. And that's going to give you so much insight into what the process is. And then when you have that insight, if you feel like you're ready to go do it, then dive in and get started and see how it goes. And then, like with all things in entrepreneurship, step back every week or two and say, am I going in the right direction? Is this hitting the objectives that I want? That kind of thing.
All right. We'll take this last question, which says, in your opinion, what strategies or approaches have proven to be most effective in navigating the complexities of the fundraising landscape and achieving entrepreneurial success?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's really that feedback point. I think for any startup or founder or entrepreneurial business, regardless of what market you're in, you are often, I mean, you are always outmatched by some bigger competitor, and you have any number of things that are disadvantages. You only have a team of three, or you only have a team of 10, or you don't have enough cash, or you don't have enough time. There's all kinds of disadvantages that get in your way to success. And so you always want to find and understand and listen to everything, every data point that's around you so that you can find the simplest, easiest path forward. The worst thing I see folks do, we have this phrase at 82i, we call it go with the tide. And the idea is like, the tide goes in, go in with the tide. But if the tide's going in and you try to swim out, you're going to exert a whole lot more energy trying to go against the tide than you would be if you just found a creative way that took you in a direction you wanted to go that goes with the tide. And so seeking feedback allows you and puts you in that position where you can find creative solutions to track to the direction you want to go. And so the question was, what's the best strategy for fundraising success and entrepreneurial success? I think it's seeking feedback and incorporating it.
Perfect. Thank you, Jason. And with that, I would like to thank you for taking the time and providing such insightful insights to the workshop, and the guests for joining us today. We will be back soon with more workshops, and I hope that the event was well worth your time and you had as much fun attending it as we had bringing it to you. Again, I would like to bring your attention back to the screen for our upcoming events. We host Startup Empowering and Investor Insider events on a weekly basis. So if you would like to keep track of the latest, do register for them. We hope to see you again at some of our virtual events. Till then, take care and stay safe. Thank you, Jason, once again. Bye bye.
Thank you so much. Take care, everybody.